What's up, squad? It's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So today, I really wanted to discuss my Black Mount Rushmore, as I call it, Mount Noir, and the people I put on there. Some reasons why I put them on there, as well as some major historical figures that I didn't include. And I felt as though it'd be a great reason to illustrate why. Now, my Mount Noir, the four people that I did select, and the criteria I used was kind of simple. My only real requirements was they had to be born within the United States, and I really wanted people who were builders beyond rhetoric, people that really, I think, left tangible or implemented blueprints to for others that are able to acquire and implement themselves. Everybody, I want to set off by saying I'm going to be mentioning a lot of names. All are titans. All these people I have an immense respect for, and it will be my honor if I ever came across them in life. But the reason why I went on this Mount Rushmore model is because it was intellectual exercise that I knew would stress my criteria for judgment. It would draw contrast, which would allow me to discern distinction, as well as it'd be a reflection of me. I think one of my life hacks is when I meet people sometimes, I'll ask them, who are their heroes, people that I admire? And that's a gem about that person, just like a job interview question. It reveals it reveals a lot about that person without asking them something very introspective, without intruding on them too much. Because that person that they tell you that admire is going to reflect the traits that they wish they had or wish they could build upon to reach the level of that person they admire. So, of course, this list is going to be just as reflective as me as anything else, but I truly believe the four individuals that I selected are paragons and in Black American history and should be celebrated as much. As well as I know some people which say because they aren't famous enough, and I think that's another knock that's unfair. Because the question is who is famous and why are they famous? Because the old political quote goes, if you see a turtle on a post, ask yourself who put that turtle there because they didn't get there by themselves. So without further ado, let's dig into my Mount Noir first. My Black Mount Rushmore, starting with my four members are Booker T. Washington, Major Martin Delany, Mary McLeod Bethune, as well as Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. So Booker T. Washington, I need saying not much about this guy. He's famous enough as it is. He's what I like to call the architect. He laid the blueprint, founder of Tuskegee Institute at Alabama, which promoted vocational training. This was a person that said, why buy a shoe, or his philosophy illustrated why buy a shoe when you can build a shoe. He was very functional, something that I very appreciate because that is what I mean by the blueprint. It can be implemented and utilized. He connected the real world that we lived in with connections to money. He was able to connect with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, get money for those things. He was able to articulate the Atlanta Compromise, where he said, okay, look, we're in the South, being Black America. And you know what, Southerners, it's no reason to throw this all away. We need everybody in America to help the Black community grow, whether that's Northern investors, but also the people of the South. We, regardless of the slavery and what came about because of slavery and tension there, we're still neighbors and we need to make this work. And just as though we're not happy with the institution of slavery, I'm sure that the Southern whites weren't happy with being scapegoated for the situation that became the Civil War. And he was really trying to build those bridges and to be everybody and really laid out, as I said, a blueprint on conversations that Black people could have with other communities that will build bridges instead of draw chasms and rivers of barriers between each other. So I really appreciated by that. So his ability to garner money from some of the most successful people in the world and tell them, hey, your dollars should be, a portion of that should be allocated to Black America. And this is why it's important. For him to be able to articulate that and achieve that, I thought was phenomenal, as well as connecting truly political insight comes from economic power. And how can you truly have political interest without economic interest? So I really thought Booker T illustrated that well. Next person, Martin Delaney, Major Martin Luther Delaney, abolitionist. He worked with Frederick Douglass on the North Star. He wrote extensively. He was a first black field grade officer. He was a chaplain in the Union Army. Physician in the Union Army. And one of the things that I really admire about him as well as he was a pioneer. This is a person that was looking for opportunities for Black Americans to establish a base of land, a earth for themselves. And he went as far as Africa, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Nigeria to survey land for this opportunity. And he constantly preached about the theory and the impact and the need for Black empowerment. And this was so revolutionary to me because he did this 40 years before H. Sylvester Williams coined Pan-Africanism, or he did this in a age before Marcus Garvey. I think it's interesting that Marcus Garvey came half a century later, if not more, and had never, a fun fact, had never been in Africa. And here you go, Martin Delaney, who's so much older in the 19th century, already going to Africa looking for land. And I think that pioneering spirit, that exploration, and also being able to connect the Black world to the greater global world, I thought that was exceptional, and that's why I really put him on the list. Just the courage, his in that early pioneer spirit to try to provide a livelihood for his people in that philosophical framework, I thought was impressive. Mary McLeod Bethune obviously started off what is now Bethune-Cookman, a small school in Florida. I believe she started off with five students and modern day equivalent of $60. And she built that into the university we know now over time. But she was also an advisor to the Roosevelt administration, growing Black influence within the White House at the time. She was the head of the National Congress for Negro Women, networking women organizations. She's a woman that dedicated her life to the connecting as well as education of Black youth, which I think is so important because that is one of the key distinctions of growth and development, and that is knowledge of utility. So the fact that Mary McLeod Bethune was able to bring that nurturing power to this list, the mother teacher, a woman that did so much to enrich the minds of Black youth. That's why I put her on Mount Noir. And lastly, Bishop Harry McNeil Turner. This is a very interesting one. I had to get a religious figure because it is African American history, and I know how big of a role the church has historically played in all societies, especially Black societies. You got to remember, this was the one place Blacks were really able to congregate, get along with. Obviously, as I said, in other precedents of other civilizations, the priests or highly educated people would probably the only person in the community could read. But what Henry McNeil Turner really did was he connected the religious aspects to the empowerment aspects. He was also a member of he was a Black legislature in Georgia. He, like I say, was a bishop of AME, which stands for basically the AME is the African church. So when you have this branch that's catered to Black national thought, as well as building these institutions, as he was connecting these groups, these AMEs, these African Methodist Episcopal Church. He was connecting all these organizations, growing that network, putting religious at the center of community, which is so important to society because a common religion transcends cities, states, nations, and able to provide a common ground for building. When I grew up, AME and Baptist being the majority, but a lot of African Americans are Baptists or AME. And the Baptists are kind of known for appealing to the local crowd and grassroots, I can say. Whereas AME was a lot more orchestrated, organized. As I said, he was a bishop. He oversaw multiple churches. So not only did he preach and bring a black nationalist thought in everything that he did to the community, but he was able to grow and scale this in an organization that allowed him to do so. So for the other side of the argument is, okay, there are a lot of famous names that I left off, and there are too many to count. So I quickly asked AI, I said, okay, AI, if you had to take a survey, who would you guess would be on their average African American Mount Rushmore? And I want to contrast my list, and my list didn't change. I'm very proud and happy with the thought that I put in and the criteria I used to select my list. But the names they gave me were Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. All phenomenal and exceptional characters. But I'll explain briefly why I decided I didn't put them in my list. Oh, and I'll deal with the big dog first of all, Martin Luther King. If you were African American, Martin Luther King is shoved down your throat. I know this because Black History Month just passed, and every kid, all they know is Martin Luther King, and this is nothing new. I remember the Chris Rock joke where he said, that's all he knew as well. And, they would say, what's the capital of Zaire? And he would say, Martin Luther King. And they say, well, what's the woman that refused to give up her seat on the bus? And he was like, a woman? Are you sure it's a woman? And he would say, okay, I got it. It's Martina Luther King. And Martin Luther King is crammed, a non-violent Martin Luther King is crammed down the African American throat. We have Martin Luther King Day. He is seen as the end all and be all, a pacifist leader that is pushed upon us. And I always wonder, how is he outranked all the others? Obviously, him, Malcolm X on this list, these are men that sacrificed their life for the causes they believed in. And that's truly to be respected. And as well, these are courageous souls that went against immense adversity. But the older I get and the more I look into the civil rights, it really starting to border on the great distraction. One thing when I look at my Mountain War, all those people were thoroughly in depth and born within the 1800s. And there was some change in leadership styles where it became less about Black self-empowerment and a lot of more about getting concessions from the white majority of the country, a sort of a grievance and entitlement, so to speak. Let us in. We want access to what you got, as opposed to developing and growing on what we have and how we can enrich other communities and therefore create genuine partnerships. And I think Martin Luther King was at the forefront of this. Now, we could tag him with the lineup of civil rights advocate. He's the major player of such. And there was key contributions such as the Voters' Rights Act and the Civil Rights Acts that were passed in the mid 60s. But I don't really think Bolton is the underlying problem of a lot of the pains and ailments of the Black community. Lack of education, poverty, etc. These things are, but not necessarily voting, because I think voting without influence, or I think it's very, very, it can go wayward. As you can see now, how many presidents promise things to get votes, or how many leaders promise things to get votes, but the people really don't have a check on them because they're beholden to their donors and their PACs, and that's what happens. So you can beat you. It's not that voting is irrelevant. It's just that you can only get so much ROI from voting until it's diminishing return. And there's a lot more opportunity within developing the community, more grassroots style things, as well as teaching the members of the community how to properly think or how to develop the things and tools that they have at their disposal. My Mount Noir, a lot of those people built with little to nothing. These were not wealthy, rich individuals. They took what they had and they kind of maximized that. Martin Luther King, with these the Civil Rights Acts passed, the Voter Rights Acts passed, I believe he passed away in '68. And when he moved on to that, it wasn't a double down on the development, but he did a lot of black adjacent themes, and a big major one after those passages of those acts, which means the laws already exist. And I think that's the frustrating thing, is when I asked about the civil rights, it's really about execution. It was about the laws already exist. It was a matter of application. So it was borderline um, repetitive of what had already taken precedent 100 years prior with the passage of those laws. I mainly the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. So the Civil Rights Amendments or the Emancipation Amendments. But nevertheless, so Martin Luther King got into labor rights and things, and when he passed, he was really thick into that. He was going up and talking about housing segregation, but he would be equivalent to a social justice person in modern times, and so be it. But I don't think his focus was on the advancement and empowerment of the Black community. I don't think. I think he led a lot of issues or tried to deal with a lot of issues that affected Blacks. But I think the diagnosis of the disease that he gave to Black America, I think it was off track. Not to take away from his courage and his amazing accomplishments. Um, Malcolm X. Malcolm X. This is a hard one for me because I quote Malcolm X 1,000 times a day. I don't think anybody. The reason why I do that is because I don't think anybody has articulated and diagnosed as well the current predicament then or now of African American in America. My my but where I get lost with Malcolm, the great intellect that he is, probably one of the most articulate men that we have ever produced in the culture, is I think if Malcolm had got everything he ever asked for, I don't think he could have advanced it one step. I don't think he had a functional plan to actually get things accomplished. Now I can go through a lot of speeches where, like I said, he diagnosed a problem. He say this is the issue. This is who to blame the issue. But I can't think of any functional solutions that were implemented during his life, of which he left uh, when he was so tragically assassinated. And I think that's saying something with leadership. I think a part of leadership, yes, is identifying the problem, but another part of leadership is understanding that problem enough to create an insightful framework, a blueprint for a solution, and to be able to implement it. Because this is how you trust the true intelligence of it all. Because if it's truly accurate, your solution should fit and resolve the problem. So that's kind of my issue on that front. And I couldn't get over that, especially when I was looking at some of those other major people that I really think did go out there. They really did hit the groundwork. Booker T was able to get the funding. He was able to get the school built. Um, uh, Bishop McNeil Turner was able, and Mayor McLeod was able to expand the school and their reach and organization. Martin Delaney was able to get to Africa, etc. So that's was my concern there. Harriet Tubman. Okay, now Harriet Tubman, what a phenomenally courageous woman, escaped slavery, came back, believe freed over 70 people, associated with freeing over 70 people around 13 trips, some going as far as Canada, out of the state of Maryland. She's going into Maryland and using Underground Railroad to basically transport slaves to freedom, especially in the post 1850s where slavery was really intense and a lot of laws were meant to bring slaves back to, like the Fugitive Slaves Act, to bring slaves back to the South. So amazingly courageous to risk that and keep going back. But what Harriet Tubman, she was a spy, she was a scout, most importantly, a conductor on. She was a spy and a scout for the Union Army, but she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And what the Underground Railroad is a fragmented uh, series of routes and safe houses that slaves were transferred to on their way to the north. You know, it's this way of basically getting slaves to the north covertly. And Harriet Tubman was a cog in her wheel. She wasn't the originator of that wheel. She wasn't the creator of the wheel. She was a conductor. There were multiple conductors. It was a big fragmented network. It was not one underground railroad. This is more of an error of operation. Error. Like this is a era of our time being that this practice was common enough to overlap with each other. There were different routes and different safe houses. It wasn't monopolized. It wasn't one system, and she operated within that system. But it was safe houses, station masters, agents that connected the people. She was a conductor. There were multiple conductors. There were investors, the people that helped sustain this thing. from a funding point of view. So I just feel as though, from a leadership point of view, I think she played a very strong tactical role. But like, there's a gentleman named William Steele, who I think is barely anyone knows who this person is. He freed hundreds of slaves. In fact, he was probably my number five. If I didn't max out at 4 on the Mount Rushmore, he probably was going. He was going to be my fifth person. Like, that's the one that's cutting edge. If I had to put one person over, it would have been him, as well as he was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, as well as a successful businessman. So I just don't think she was the most, how should I say, exceptional person within the Underground Railroad, let alone all of Black history. So I think she's phenomenally courageous, amazing what she does. God bless her soul. She never lost. They say she didn't lose not one single slave. She is truly a phenomenon. And lastly, Frederick Douglass. So Frederick Douglass, he was an abolitionist, and he was an editor and writer for the North Star. But beyond that, I can't find any um, hard frameworks of leaderships, institutions, connectivity he did to truly raise Black America in such a much needed time, right? In this transition from slavery to independence. I just wasn't expecting more. It's not that I was expecting more. This Frederick Douglass is phenomenal in himself. But when you have these four people, when I have Washington, Delaney, McLeod, and Bishop Turner, I just can't demote them off of Mount Noir. I just can't do it in comparison to these other phenomenal talents. But this is my opinion. I love to hear your thoughts. Comment below. Praise to the ancestors. Comment below, like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. And until next time, take care. Bantu up.